YouTube channel. I just want to start this video off by saying thank you so much to all of my subscribers. I just hit 7,000 subscribers. It takes so long to get to the first 1,000, then every 1,000 after is like a huge milestone, and I'm just really excited that you guys are all here with me. Now in today's video, we're going to have a discussion about the difference between jointed dolls, articulated dolls, and ball jointed dolls. Now before I say anything else, what I want to tell you is that I don't consider myself an expert on the subject. This is just a discussion. This is what I think about those words, and this is how I think, they apply to our dolls. So I think about jointed dolls, articulated dolls, and ball jointed dolls as polygons, rectangles, and squares. So what do I mean by that? So every square is the most specific, right? Every square is a rectangle and a polygon, but not every rectangle is a square, not every polygon is a rectangle, and so on and so forth. So that's the thing. All ball jointed dolls are articulated and jointed and so on. So that's kind of the way I think about it. So let's talk about jointed dolls. There are some dolls that are not jointed at all. Now I dug through my collection to try to find an example of one, and the best thing I could find is this Wimoda vinyl figure that has no joints on it. So they don't move at all. Now these are really popular. I don't want to say these, I'm going to say there were dolls called Frozen Charlottes at one time. And they were called Frozen Charlottes. They were just bisque or porcelain dolls. They didn't move. It was just one single form. And they were named after a ballad where a girl was going to a party on New Year's Eve, and she loved her dress and thought she looked really pretty, and so she wouldn't cover up, and she actually froze to death in the carriage ride on the way to the party. And so they called these dolls Frozen Charlottes after that. So those dolls didn't move at all. They were just frozen. Now, a jointed doll, most dolls today are going to be jointed. Now, a lot of dolls are going to have your 5 joints. So let's look at an American Girl, for example. You have a head joint, which turns. Each arm has a joint, so those are joints. And then the legs have a joint. So those are a 5 jointed doll. And most dolls, like I said today, are going to have those basic 5 joints. Now you do have some dolls, for example this one, now this is an older doll. The only joints she has are the 2. So her 2 arms move and that's it. But those are joints. Another example of a doll that I would just call jointed are my Lavender and Poupées dolls. They have also the 5 joints. So you've got the legs. Now this one is also jointed with a spring mechanism. So it has a spring mechanism inside, which holds all the parts together. So this is a spring jointed doll. And the American Girls are actually, they're strung. So they're strung in between. Now, let's talk about articulated dolls. So a lot of times you'll see the words articulated describing a doll. Generally what I've found that to mean in the doll community and with doll collectors and doll sellers is articulated means it has more than the typical 5 joints. So it's going to have more than your head, arm, and leg joints. For example, the Cruislings. So the Cruislings are what I would call an articulated doll because they have a knee joint. They have a foot joint. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, they have the leg joints, 5, 6 joints. They have elbow joints, 7, 8. They have a hand joint, 9, 10. A shoulder joint, 11, 12. And then a head joint, 13. So this is what you would typically see called, at least from my experience, an articulated doll. I've seen people in the community use that word to describe a doll, like I said, with more than your typical 5 joints. So the Cruisling is an example of that. Your Made to Move Barbies are an example of that. Here is one of my Pretty Girls that was manufactured by the Tonner Company. They're an example of that. They have knee joints. Now they don't have the foot joint, but they have the knee joint. They have these 2 joints here, and they have elbow joints. So they've got 4 extra joints in addition to your typical 5. So people would generally, or like I say in the community, a lot of people will call those articulated. But they're not ball jointed. So let's talk about what ball jointed means. Ball jointed dolls have been around for a long time. It's not a new thing. So my friend Leah was kind enough to let me use these pictures of her very old ball jointed dolls. And so here they are. And these are antique dolls, I believe from the late 1800s, early 1900s. I'm gonna have to have her come do a guest spot on my channel to talk about antique dolls because I really know very little about them. But these are doll bodies that are made of wood that are ball jointed. They have balls for the joints and they move as a ball jointed doll does. Now today in the ball jointed doll community, there is a lot of disagreement over what constitutes a ball jointed doll. So some people say in order for a doll to be ball jointed, it has to be strung, which means it has string in it. It has to be made of resin, and it has to have, you know, ball joints. Some people will agree that other things can be called ball jointed dolls. So let's look at a couple of examples and I'll tell you my thoughts on them. So this is a Mamoni doll, and I don't think anybody would argue that she is a ball jointed doll. She falls under all the very specific things that people want to say ball jointed dolls are. She's got joints, you know, that have the and literally, you know, they have a ball shape to them, and that's where the ball jointed name comes from. You can see the joint has a rounded edge. You can especially see it on the wrists because the wrist has that ball joint there. So a ball joint is a ball and a socket that creates a joint that moves. And so that's where you have a ball joint. Now, a discussion that I saw come up recently was, are smart dolls considered ball jointed dolls or not? And it's like 50-50. Half of the people say yes and half say no. And some people are very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? They really like care what you think which way. To me, you know, I don't really care. They have balls at the joints. So every joint has a ball that operates on a hinge. So you've got this ball joint, but it moves on a hinge. You've got the ball, you've got the socket. So to me, I've always called them ball jointed dolls because they have a literal ball at the joint. But if you're going by the definition of, you know, what some people call ball jointed doll, it might not be. Now, Danny Chu, when he posts pictures of smart dolls, he always hashtags them BJD. So I feel like if he's gonna hashtag them BJD, you know, he wants people to kind of call them BJDs. So in my mind, I've always thought of them as a BJD, and you know, but some people disagree with that, and that's fine. That's just me. That's like I said, I'm not the final authority. I'm not an authority on the subject, and I'm not an expert. I think this is one of those things where that's up to interpretation a little bit. Like, what do you consider ball jointed? Because, you know, the dolls back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, some of those are strong and they have springs, but they have the ball joints there. So that's really cool, in my opinion. And even before then, you know, there are articulated dolls that go back centuries and centuries, back into antiquity, like ancient times. They found examples of dolls with arms that move and stuff like that. So those are jointed dolls. I don't want to say they're ball jointed dolls because, you know, it's not the same thing, but that's just kind of my take on jointed versus articulated versus ball jointed. So I just think it's an interesting conversation every time it comes up, because I always find it interesting how people choose to describe their dolls too, especially when they're selling. Because a lot of people, if they have a doll that has those extra joints, they almost always call them articulated, or I see them call them fully articulated or jointed. So, you know, but most dolls today, there's very few dolls that I can even think of that don't at least have a neck joint. So, you know, most of them are gonna have at least the one joint. So anyway, guys, what do you think about jointed versus articulated versus ball jointed? How have you heard people use those words in discussion and conversation and topics? So I'd love to know your opinion in the comments below. And also, if you notice my super sweet shirt, so I do have a merch shop now if you want to get your own shirt. They're great for sitting around and watching my channel, watching other YouTubers' channels, for sitting around eating snacks. if we ever go back to doll shows, for wearing to doll shows. So I'll leave the link below if you want to get your own shirts. It's through TeePublic. I've bought a lot of other shirts from them, Star Wars shirts and things like that, so I thought I'd go with that company. But anyway, so I'll leave that below if you want to check it out. And again, let me know in the comments what you think about this whole conversation, because it's such an interesting conversation to me, and the way I feel about it, there's no right or wrong answer. And I think a lot of people want to get in this conversation and they want to be condescending almost, and I don't think that's what doll collecting is about. I don't think it's a thing of condescension. I think, you know, there's some room for interpretation, especially with the ball jointed doll bit. I think there's a lot of room for interpretation there. So anyway, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.